You so much, Dr. Williams. And how is Howard doing today? Everybody okay? All right. So I don't know if you can see this. There's a little bit of a glare, but we're going to talk about practices of freedom and justice. How do we optimize our history, our heritage, and its potentials? And so I want to give you some facts first, because I want to get you in the right mindset for considering how to optimize our history and our potential. This is 2015. China will soon be the largest English speaking country in the world. 26% of South Asians, these are people from the Indian subcontinent, 26% of South Asians with the highest IQs are greater than the total population of the United States. India has more honors freshmen than the US has freshmen. I know it's like we don't think about this stuff, but you're going to need to think about it because it's going to impact on your future. The top 10 jobs that existed in 2012 didn't even exist 6 years before then. Today, the vocabulary of the English language is 5 times larger than it was in the 18th century. We're being beset by new information, new perspectives all the time. 1 week's worth of New York Times news is greater than and provides more information than an individual would have encountered in a lifetime 300 years ago. So finally, supercomputers have increased our computational capabilities, and their computational capabilities are greater than the intellectual power of the human brain. So these are very interesting times, as the Chinese would say, very interesting times. And it's really going to depend, your success is going to depend upon how well you prepare yourself for this really unknown future here. The real question I want to deal with today is how do we hold on to, promote, and grow from our own unique message? And I came to Howard in 2013, 2 years ago, because I was very interested in our message as people of African descent in the Americas, as legacy African Americans. How do we validate our genius? Because we know we have genius, whether it's recognized out in the larger community or not, we know we have genius. And how do we maintain our identity, our focus, and our perspective? And this is really key to our survival while we continue to improve and uplift the status of all humanity. Because I'm a firm believer that our presence in this country at this point in time in the history of human evolution, that it's no accident, that we're here for a purpose, for a reason. And the purpose is not to be beat down by police. That's a joke, guys. The purpose is, although it's not a joke, right? That's not our purpose here. Our purpose is to manifest our genius. Our purpose is to act as saviors for humanity. So how are we going to do that? I like to call Africans of the Americas New World Africans because the predominance of our genetic heritage is from Africa. And the overwhelming predominance of our cultural practices are from Africa. But we have modest admixture, modest gene flow from non-Africans. And that's all good. That just makes us even better people. As New World Africans, we've never been afforded the luxury of letting our guard down, of resting on our past accomplishments. Our struggles continue to be ongoing and they require constant vigilance. And so we can never just chill and sit back and let things go. We have to be on top of what's happening. We have to be aware. That's our calling. So this was a question that was put to uh, a national survey of U.S. adults, non-Hispanic whites, blacks, and Hispanics. And the question was, do you think racism against blacks is or is not widespread in the U.S.? And the green bars are those people saying yes, and the yellow bar is those people saying no, it's not. And so you can see here that as far as African Americans are concerned, 78% of blacks said, yeah, racism is a widespread problem. Whereas for non Hispanic whites, only 51% seem to think that racism was a problem still. And Hispanics fell somewhere in between at 59%. So the key issues that we need to keep track of and remind ourselves of, because the onslaughts are daily. It's the microaggression, you know, that when we go into department stores and are followed around, or when you write a paper and your professor, who's not sympathetic to you or your cause, uh, diminishes what you've written, even though you have classic and noteworthy ideas. We should remember that our connection to Africa is really central. I just want to tell you that when I was growing up, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and there were a few people, a few Japanese Americans who had been interned in concentration camps during World War II, and they settled in Denver, and an even smaller proportion of Chinese. And we used to think at the time that anything made in China was a piece of junk. And all that changed when China got nuclear weapons. You see, it's all contextualized. Our context needs to be Africa because it's our homeland, it's the homeland of our species, and we'll get the biggest dividends from investing in that mindset. There is a lot of intra-group variability. There's no one black personality, or no one black person, no one black stereotype. We are highly diverse at every single level, even at cultural levels and dietary preferences. It varies. You know, the traditional foods in North Carolina and in Georgia, quite distinct from the traditional foods in Louisiana. So differences in us, within our group, is a source of strength. We know that the environment can influence gene expression patterns. And this is some work that was pioneered by Ernest Just. A building is named for Professor Just here on this campus. He was the father of epigenetics. I don't know how many of you know about epigenetics, but what we now understand is that the environment that you're exposed to can change the way that the gene expresses itself. It doesn't change your genome, but it changes the expression patterns, the proteins that are produced. I'll talk more about the epigenome in a little while, but it's important to understand that what you're exposed to matters, and it looks like this epigenome, by the way, can be inherited. In other words, you are carrying chemical markers that your grandparents originated. In other words, the environments that they were exposed to, you are now manifesting some of the consequences of that. Our transatlantic um, diaspora is just one of many African diasporas. We tend to be very focused on the Atlantic diaspora, but there's so many diasporas of African people to all parts of the world. Um, we know that in terms of the environment, and I skipped this one, but I want to go back, that the social and cultural environment does have an impact on our biological outcomes. So it does matter if we watch a whole lot of violent movies or if we eat a lot of junk food, or if we hear a lot of negative and degrading music, it does have an impact on our biology. We want to recognize, and we should, as a people, recognize the importance of interdisciplinarity in understanding and improving our status. The solutions to our problems will never just be a single genetic test or a single medicine or a single anything, even a single social intervention. It's the interdisciplinarity that has to come together in order to come up with solutions that are going to work for us as a people. And I'm very concerned about us. Although I must say that since I've been here at Howard, it's been a real blessing to see the students that come here. I feel like there's some hope for our folks. We have to refer to the wisdom of those who came before us, like W.B. Du Bois. And we have had so many geniuses, so many people ahead of their time, and we have to acknowledge them. So information sharing is what is going to get us to resolving some of the major scientific problems that our people are faced with. Now, I direct the W. Montague Cobb Research Lab. It's over in Douglas Hall. I guess that's this direction. And we have two major collections there. We're trying to get some more. But the two that we have are the New York African Burial Ground and the Cobb Collection. The New York African Burial Ground is a collection of skeletal material and dental material and bioarchaeological material from 17th and 18th century Africans and African Americans. This is deep history for us. The Cobb Collection is a collection of about almost 700 individuals, their skeletons, including their dental work, and we have clinical records on them. And these were individuals collected by Dr. Cobb, and he collected them because he wanted to have the evidence to show the impact of racism on the body. He wanted to have the evidence to show the impact of poverty on the body. Why is that important? Well, if you know anything about science, you know that the one with the most data wins. So Dr. Cobb's efforts in collecting these cadavers and defleshing them and documenting them, it allows us to now look back into the 19th and 20th century and see what was life like for our people in Washington, D.C. Dr. Cobb was an outstanding anatomist, physician, biological anthropologist. He was the first African American to earn his PhD in biological anthropology, and he was also president of the National Association of Biological Anthropologists. And he had a vision to collect material so that we could study it today, that we could use the best scientific techniques to elucidate, to explain, how the history of our health disparities, to go back in time and look at all those young men, some of them you guys' age, who died from tuberculosis in Washington, D.C., or died from syphilis before there were treatments available, or at least treatments were not being given to us. I'm also a professor in biology, and biology is the Department of Biology. The building that it's housed in is named after Ernest Everett Just. The Department of Biology is located in Just Hall, and Howard has been home to a long lineage of scholars. Just made really pioneering efforts, contributions in cell biology and in embryology. And at the time that Just was doing his work in the 20s, he was like a lone pioneer. But he could see in the cell that it wasn't just all about the genome, that the environment, something going on in the cytoplasm, clearly had an impact on how that cell behaved. And that's why we call him the father of epigenetics. That's not just me saying he's the father. There was a recent publication in American Scientist extolling just insights on the cell and how he had to counter the genocentrism of the time, you know, and these were the same people who he was opposing, who were saying that we were genetically inferior, that we were genetically stupid, that we were born to be slaves or to be servants. And he was able to counter that. Now, he didn't get all the attention that he should have gotten because of the racism in the scientific system, in the academy. But he published his data and he documented his insights. And that's why we're able to go back today and call him the father of epigenetics. Then there's a third scientist I want to talk to you about that you probably have never heard of, John Edwinstone. Anybody heard of John Edwinstone? Okay, so John Edwinstone was alive in the middle of the 19th century. He was a contemporary of Charles Darwin. But John Edwinstone had been enslaved in Guyana, and he learned while he was enslaved how to be a taxidermist, that is, how to stuff animals. And when Darwin, he used his taxidermy, by the way, to free himself. That's how he paid for his freedom. And then he left and went to London. And in London, he was giving lectures at the University of Edinburgh and the University of London. And he was teaching students there taxidermy. After Darwin failed out of divinity school, then he failed out of medical school because whenever they do autopsies, he'd go throw up. So he wasn't going to last very long in medical school. So his father was saying, what am I going to do with this kid? They found that a ship was going, the Beagle, going to explore parts of the Americas that no one knew about. And so the senior Darwin, Erasmus Darwin, wanted to put Charles Darwin on the boat, but Darwin didn't have any skills. So he asked Edwinson to teach him how to do taxidermy. So Darwin's task on the Beagle, the ship that he was on, where he made his major insights in natural selection and evolution, that the skills that got him on that ship were taxidermy that he learned from a black man. Did you know that? They didn't teach you that in Biology 101, did they? This is why we have to dig deep and get our own history and find out what was really going on. Now, the other thing about Edwinstone is that he knew, coming from Guyana, he knew all about the tropical rainforest. So he was able to inspire Darwin such that when Darwin actually had a chance to see the tropical rainforest, he could appreciate the magnitude of diversity and variability of life forms in the tropical rainforest. So it all is starting to slowly come together and make sense to me because I teach about Darwin. I teach a course called Biological Anthropology and Human Evolution. So Darwin is all up in there. But we could never make sense out of how he got on the Beagle since he was a loser. I'm just saying. He learned skills that would help him and insights that benefited him so that we talk about him now as a major figure in Western science. But he got his insights from John Edwinstone. So the research that I do is a lot of it is on population substructuring. And what we're trying to do is look at complex populations like African Americans and look at the stratifications and the substructure within those populations. We're trying to do that so that we can better understand the distribution of complex diseases. Because across our range, we don't all suffer from the same diseases. In this Washington, D.C. area, prostate cancer and breast cancer are very important. But if you go down to Mississippi Delta region, prostate cancer is not that big a deal. And what I mean is that African Americans don't suffer any more than European Americans in Mississippi Delta, in Louisiana. So we're trying to understand, where did the people come from? What genes did they bring to the Americas? What kinds of environmental exposures have they had that will influence gene expression patterns? And how does that all influence the disease profiles? So I asked the question, who are the African American people? Where do they come from? And where can we use that information to help us go in the right direction? And the best definition I have for us is that we are an amalgamation of genetic and cultural subsets of West and West Central African peoples. In other words, we are a mixture of African peoples. That's totally legitimate. We're a mixture of African peoples with modest gene flow from non-Africans. And the non-Africans of relevance, be they Native Americans or Europeans, depends on what part of the country you're from, what part of the Western Hemisphere you're from. But the African component is really pretty clear. West and West Central Africans were the ones mainly being brought to the Americas. But of course, within Africa, there's mobility. So it's not surprising that we pick up someone here who has gene frequencies that are similar to frequencies we find in Central African Republic, or even in Kenya, or in Mozambique, because actually people were picked up from Mozambique and brought to the Americas. The gene frequency differences among different ethnic groups and subgroups and gene flow between different ethnic groups can result in frequent false positive results or reduced power in genetic studies. In genetic studies, which is what I do a lot of, you really need to know who are the people that you're studying. And if you don't know who you're studying, then the power of your insights is going to be reduced. So the key findings that we've discovered and that we've reinforced, other researchers have also reinforced, is that humanity is of African origin. In other words, the oldest skeletal as well as molecular genetic information on humans, on our species, comes out of Africa. All non-African diversity is a subset of African diversity. Let me just repeat that one. All non-African diversity is a subset of this larger category called African diversity. Why is that important? Because it reminds us of the fundamental unity of humanity. And that unity occurred in Africa. And then a small group of Africans migrated out of Africa probably 80 to 60,000 years ago. And then those people became the progenitors of the non-Africans on this planet. But their variability is a subset of African diversity. There's more diversity between two Africans than between an indigenous person from the British Isles and an indigenous person from Japan. It's amazing, isn't it? All of that. And a large chunk of that diversity, not all of it, but a large chunk of it, is with us here in the Americas. Africa is central to our understanding of our species. And we can't really talk about human biology without talking about Africa. In terms of the peopling of the world, we know that we know most about mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited from the maternal lineage. So you have your mother's mitochondrial DNA type, and Y chromosome, which if you're male, you have your father's Y chromosome. So we can trace back the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome, and we can get these gender-specific migration patterns out of Africa into various parts of the world. Knowledge, this kind of knowledge, is acquired through purposeful study, experimentation, observation, and contemplation. These are the same skills that you're going to need here at Howard in order to be a successful student. Now, our geographical distributions in the United States reflect our past histories. And This area where you see the lavender, I should have brought a pointer with me, but you see the lavender down in the southern states? Do you guys see that? Okay, so those are the counties where the majority of the people say that they are of African descent, that they're African Americans. Um, and the other colors are not so bright in this showing, but you can see that those are the same counties where the big plantations were. So we've developed this technique called ethnogenetic layering, and it's to get at that population substructuring, the stratifications that we talk about. And ethnogenetic layering is just a computational tool that we developed in my lab. We worked on this for, I guess, about 15 years to try to identify the substructure in African Americans, because in the literature, we were just being dealt with as if we were just all the same people. They would test 5 black people from Chicago and say, okay, based on what those 5 black people show, we know all about all the other African Americans. And it's like, that's ridiculous. So substructure is something that's really important for us to understand, because we have this intra-group variability, this diversity within us, and that's one of our strengths. We're going to use these new computational tools to kind of help us sort through the complexity of our past and our present, and perhaps provide roadmaps for the future. So this is just a little cartoon of it, that we use these variables, anthropological variables, residential variables, genetic ancestry, dietary patterns, clinical details, environmental toxin exposures, and we layer these. You hold geography constant, and then you layer all the information that you have. And then you cut through the layers, just like you'd slice through a cake, okay? And this is some information that I want to show you. Um, these are the Native American groups at 3 areas that we've been studying. We've looked at the Chesapeake Bay, which is this area, the Carolina coast, which is north of South Carolina, Georgia, all the way down to Jacksonville, Florida, and Mississippi Delta. We looked at the Native Americans, then we layered on top of that the Europeans. So these are the European groups that came. This is during the colonial period. Then we layered on top of that the Africans. And the Africans that came, the proportions varied from the Chesapeake Bay to the Carolina coast to the Mississippi Delta. So this is showing the proportions of Africans from particular areas, particular regions of Africa that were brought to the Chesapeake Bay. And you can see that 38% of the Africans came from the Bight of Bonny. This is the area known as Biafra. This is southeastern Nigeria. Do we have any Igbo people here? All right. So, so welcome home. Welcome home, Igbo people, because that you were a majority, and Igbo-related peoples, majority of the Africans brought to Chesapeake Bay. But let's look at Carolina coast. When we get in Carolina coast, 40% of the Africans came from West Central Africa. That's Angola, the Congos, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon. That's a different set of Africans. And I want you to understand that Africa, the continent of Africa, is huge. You could fit 5 continental United States in the continent of Africa. It's that large. The Bight of Bonny is only 7% of the Africans brought to the Carolina coast. And then when we look at Mississippi Delta, it's even more striking, because Mississippi Delta, the Bight of Biafra, or the Bight of Bonny rather, is 8%, but Senegal Gambia is 32%. 32%. This is why so many people in Louisiana are carrying markers that tie them back to Senegal and Gambia. It's amazing. And look at the large proportion, relatively large proportion of people coming from the Bight of Benin in the Mississippi Delta. That's 25%. These are the people who practice the voodoo religion, which is why in New Orleans you can go and buy a doll to put a curse on somebody. No? And the only other place I know that you can do that in the Americas is New York City. So these are three staging areas that Africans were brought into. And at each of these sites, you could kind of determine the relative risk, looking at the interactions of genes, environments, of genetics, environments, and culture in each of these areas. So this, we were pretty happy about this because we got this data out even before Schoenberg Center got it out, and definitely before Harvard University got it out. So this is that notion that I want to implant in your mind, that the genetic message that you've inherited is only part of the story of what you will become. Your environment has a huge impact, and we can think about the environment acting almost like a filter. And so the coded genotype passes through these filters to the expressed genotype. And what you are, which is the expressed genotype, is a reflection of gene environment interactions. Okay? Now, it's impossible at this time, at this point in our scientific history, to control our genes. We're not at that level of sophistication yet where we can genetically engineer without killing the person. But we can control our environments. And so our environment can have a huge impact on how the genes express themselves, whether we develop diabetes, whether we develop cancer, whether we develop hypertension, end-stage renal disease. All of those are very much under the control of the environment, with modest influences by the genome. I like this saying by Maya Angelou. She said, when you know better, you do better. So we want to apply the knowledge that you get here at Howard University and become wise, develop insight. But it's going to take that kind of contemplation that I spoke about before. When we use information about African American diversity, it can allow us to better understand and develop sustainable cures or interventions for our high susceptibilities to things like breast cancer, prostate cancer, hypertension, and stroke. And I want to give you some very quick examples of this in the time that's remaining here. So we've been looking at ethnogenetic layering and hypertension, and we're comparing the Carolina Coast region with the Chesapeake Bay region. Now, both regions have hypertension, but in the Carolina Coast region, it seems particularly acute. In fact, I remember driving in South Carolina on, I think it's Highway 77, and they had a big sign up about stroke. And I had never seen a big sign like that, but we call that part of the country the stroke belt because so many of our people die from stroke. Now, remember I told you that 40% of the Africans brought to the Carolina coast came from West Central Africa. West Central Africa is that area in green on the map of Africa. And the equator runs right through there, okay? That's what the equator is, just running through the lower part of Gabon and through the Congos, okay? That's an area that has low salt in the soil and in the plants. In fact, then in the rural areas of West Central Africa, when the people want to cook and season their food, if they don't have salt, if they don't have imported salt, imported from either the Sahel region or further south down in the deserts of Namibia, then they have to burn leaves and they make a potassium salt, okay? So it's a potassium salt that they're using, but that's not sodium salt. So these people tend to be sodium sensitive. If you give them sodium, their blood pressure rises dramatically. So what happens when you take people who have spent thousands and thousands of generations in a salt depleted environment and you send them to Carolina coast where salt is in everything? What happens to them? They get sick, they get stroke, they get end-stage renal disease, they get hypertension, they get cardiovascular disease. In other words, it's what we call in epigenetics a mismatch between the biology of the people and the environment that you put them in. So this is just showing you West Central Africa, so you see it a little bit closer. And it's this blue area here. So we've been working in South Carolina and North Carolina as well, looking at some of the substructure in the African Americans there. And these are some of the ethnic groups, some of the subgroups, I call them micro-ethnic groups of African Americans. They're all African Americans, but the Gullah and the Geechee, you may have heard of that group, but there's also groups known as the Red Legs and the Clay Eaters, Red Bones, Sandhillers. Of course, the Lumbee are a Native American group, but they have high levels of African American admixture. So we've been trying to look into these groups to try to understand what genes are present that might predispose the population to end-stage renal disease, hypertension, and stroke. And then how might we develop therapies that are specific for these microethnic groups? I know we do a lot of talking in this country about personalized medicine, but the majority of African Americans don't even have health insurance. They're not going to get personalized medicine. So we have to come up with strategies that are going to work for us and that are going to take our unique biology and behavior into account. Now, I also want to say something about the studies that we're doing with breast cancer, because as I told you, this area, this region, Washington, D.C., Chesapeake Bay region, is the area for a lot of breast cancer and prostate cancer. And we think that breast cancer and prostate cancer are really very similar, just in terms of their underlying genetics. So the scientific rationale is that the DMV is really a focal point for prostate and breast cancer. And we presume that there are susceptibilities, disease susceptibilities, that are similar between prostate cancer and breast cancer. And so we need to identify what I'm calling the constellation of African regional groups that disproportionately contributed to the DMV African Americans. And I showed you that 38% of the Africans came from the Bight of Bonny, from southeastern Nigeria. And in fact, when we look at breast cancer in that part of Nigeria, it looks as though they also have what we call triple negative breast cancer. It's very deadly. And you have young women dying at age 26, 25 from breast cancer. So we were comparing the Chesapeake Bay on your left with the Bight of Bonny on your right, and trying to determine what were the ethnic groups at the time of the transatlantic slave trade that would have contributed, that would have been part of that slave trade, that trade in enslaved Africans and brought them to the Chesapeake Bay. And so we've actually identified some of the ethnic groups. And those of you who are from that part of Nigeria, if you know some of these groups, I hope that you'll come by the Cobb Lab so you can educate us on these groups. And maybe you even know if some of them are, some of them are still around. Boy, that's really hard to read. Can you guys read that? Yeah. So you know what? My slides, if we could make them available to the students, that way you'll have this information that I'm giving you, okay? because it's important. So the take-home message is that ancestry and environment are both important. And discovering the ethnogenetic links between specific continental groups of Africans and African Americans, that gives us an opportunity for greater specificity in our disease prevention strategies, in our diagnostic strategies, and our treatment regimes. We can develop treatments that are fine-tuned to the biology of the people, and as we help ourselves, we also help our genetic relatives in Africa. Health disparities continues to be a major issue for peoples of African descent. And this is one way, by understanding our heritage, by looking deeper, then we're able to address these health disparities. And it's going to be incumbent upon you, not me, because I've done what I can do, but it's up to you guys to deal with these health disparities, because they're going to affect your generation and your children's generation. Neil deGrasse, who's an astrophysicist, said, "For me, I'm driven by two main philosophies. Know more today about the world than I knew yesterday, and lessen the suffering of others." You'd be surprised how far that gets you. So this is one of my favorite depictions, because even though the brothers are in the hull of a slave ship, but look at what they're doing. So try to pay attention to this. Look at what they're doing. You see the brother here? What is he doing with that lock? He's picking the lock. In a sense, that's what you're going to do, because when he picks the lock, what is he going to be? He's going to be free. So it's up to you to pick the lock, to get the knowledge, to move forward, to free yourself so that you will come together and help us. Langston Hughes said, "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly." This is where you lay down the template for your dreams. This is where you actualize your dreams. This is where you manifest your creativity, your genius, your contribution. This is where you do it. Knowledge is the life of the mind. A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. I'm a scientist, but I appreciate the wisdom of Marcus Garvey. Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is the premise of progress in every society, in every family. Thank you very much.